Do you ever wonder why your parts don't come out exactly like your design? Well, it's not guesswork. And in this lesson, we're going to go over 2 key calculations that you need to know when bending. So let's get into it. In the last lesson, we outlined a lot of key terms that you need to know before we get into this lesson. So if you haven't watched that video or you're unfamiliar with those key terms, I highly advise you go back and check those out before we dive into this one. Now, coming back to the board, we're going to go over 2 key calculations that you need to know. The first one being bend allowance and the second one being bend deduction. These are going to characterize what's happening during that bend process that you need to take in consideration when designing. Now, I promised you that we were using those key terms again. Here they are. So we're going to go over angle. Pi is a new one. Now this is just a constant from a mathematical standpoint. We're going to use 3.14 in all of our calculations. We have bend radius, our K factor, and again this is our midline thickness divided by our original material thickness. And then lastly our overall just material thickness. Now I have our diagram again here just to kind of show you a couple of different things here. But when we start looking at this bend allowance, we talked about it last time, where we have that stretching rubber band effect, right? We have this thinning in the center area, elongation of our flanges. Now, what bend allowance is the length of our adjusted center line. We talked about that in the last lesson as well. This is going to be the after bent adjustment or measurement that we're looking at. And that's really important to clarify that it's after bending. Now, this is going to be from tangent point all the way down through to tangent point. What this is showing is that we end up having that elongation taking effect. Now, when we look at our key terms that we talked about last time, we can see angle is in this equation. We have that constant of pi, but we have our bend radius, our K factor, and our thickness all tied into this equation. So if you change the angle, it changes that overall length of that adjusted midline, which changes how much stretch we have. If you change that bend radius here, we're going to end up seeing an effect come through on how long that midline is again, and we're going to end up seeing a different adjustment that we need to make. Now, it's a little bit easier to see when we look at the bend radius. If we made this larger, say we did something like this, we had a larger bend radius, sorry for the poor drawing there, and our tangent points come out to all the way to here, you can see how that midline, that adjusted midline, needs to travel further. And that's going to be more area in which we're seeing deformation in the material and more stretching, which means that we have a lot more bend allowance to take in consideration. Additionally, that K factor is in there. So this is essentially looking at what material you're using. And that is going to change whether you're doing stainless steel, steel, aluminum. This constant is going to slightly shift how much deformation you're predicting in these bends. And then lastly, the thickness of the material. The thicker the material, the more material it needs to yield during that bending process, essentially allowing more bend allowance that we need to have in there. Now we can see that this right here is essentially the after, like I talked about. So we're going to use what we're predicting to be the final end center line distance, and we're going to use that to figure out how much we need to take off of our material so that we can hit it in the long run. In the last lesson, I used the analogy of a football quarterback throwing to a receiver. We don't want to throw it to where he's at. We want to throw it to where he's going. This is going to be us throwing it to where we're going. And this calculation is what you're going to use exactly on your parts in your designs. Now, when we come and look at this again, we're going to see bend radius is in here again. Our thickness is in here again. Our angle is in here again. And you can see our bend allowance is now coming into this equation as well. Now, we're not going to necessarily do all of these calculations in this one. We don't need to get muddled down by the numbers. We need to understand that these key terms are related to each other and related to the design and the end result. So having your angle incorrect, having your bend radius incorrect in your calculations is going to make you not adjust correctly. Then your flange lengths are wrong. Maybe the hole placements are going to be in the wrong spot when you're doing multi-part designs, and then the whole entire design falls through. With that all being said, this is before bending. So our bend deduction is how much we're going to take off of our original part pre-bent. Now that's an important distinction here as we kind of look into this calculation here. What we end up wanting to do is that if we have our part and we're going to end up having this one single flange, where we have this bend line, say we want this part to be 2 inches, what we want to do is that we want to have it, and we'll say our overall part is 6 inches. We want to shrink this part up by our minus our bend deduction in order for it to stretch into our 2-inch flange with a 6-inch overall part. So this is the important part. If we don't do that, then what we're going to end up seeing here is we're going to have half the bend deduction, what we should have taken off short on this flange. So we might see like 5.990, and this one is going to be 1.990, right? So we're going to end up being short on both sides of our flanges, and we're going to be upset. We're going to be calling the manufacturer, frustrated. So with that being said now, and we understand that, it finishes up this lesson. In the next lesson, we're going to start going over exactly how the bending process is done on the manufacturing side to better understand other features that are going to be coming through. So we'll see you on the next one.